My family is coming to live with you for a while starting tomorrow, my son Gabe announced to me when I opened my front door. He didn't ask. He informed me as if I were a complete idiot who had no right to an opinion about who lived in my own home. We just can't afford rent, he added, looking at me as if it were my obligation to fix his life at 32 years old. His voice had that tone he always used as a child when he'd broken something, waiting for his mother to clean up the mess without asking questions. My daughter-in-law, Rebecca, appeared behind him, carrying a huge suitcase and smiling that false smile that turns my stomach. It was a triumphant smile, as if she had just won the lottery. "Hello, mother-in-law," she said to me in that syrupy voice she uses when she wants to manipulate me. Her eyes shone with a satisfaction that gave me goosebumps. "We hope you don't mind. It will only be for a little while." A little while. Right, like when they borrowed $506 months ago for a medical emergency and I'm still waiting for them to pay me back. I stood there in my own doorway, feeling like the world was crashing down on me. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished watering my garden plants and was preparing a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I never imagined that by opening that door, my peaceful life would turn into a nightmare. I saw how my son and his wife had already decided for me without consulting me, without asking for my permission, as if at 65 years old I was so foolish I wouldn't realize what was really happening. "We can't afford to pay the rent or buy food for 5 mouths, Gabe completed, and his words hit me like a slap. 5 mouths. Him, Rebecca, and their 3 children, twin girls who were 8 years old and a baby who was barely 1. All of them in my 2-bedroom house, in my sanctuary, where I had planned to spend my golden years in peace after working as a secretary for 30 years at Miller & Associates Construction Company. Rebecca was already pushing her suitcase inside, as if my house were a cheap hotel where they could arrive without a reservation. Her high heels clattered against the wooden floor that I had varnished with my own hands last year. Behind her, Gabe was dragging 2 more bags, and I realized this wasn't an emergency visit. It was a full-blown move, planned down to the last detail. "Mom, I knew you'd understand. After all, we're family," Gabe said, patting me on the shoulder with that condescending gesture he uses when he thinks he's handling me like a senile old woman. His smile was exactly like his father's when he used to lie to me about the money he spent at the bar. The same fake smile, the same shifty look, the same calculated gestures to make me feel guilty if I didn't give in to his whims. In that moment, as I watched Rebecca strolling through my living room as if she owned the place, touching my decorations with a familiarity that disgusted me, and my son checking my refrigerator as if it were his, something inside me ignited like a bonfire. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't disappointment, it was a cold, calculated rage I hadn't felt in years. "And where are the kids going to sleep?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm as my mind began to process all the implications of this invasion. Rebecca turned to me with that smile that I now recognized as pure malice, disguised as sweetness. "Well, we thought the twins could sleep in your room with you, and we can use the guest room with the baby. It'll be like one big family living together," she said, as if it were the most wonderful idea in the world. That's when I realized this wasn't desperation. It was a perfectly orchestrated plan, and I, the fool they thought I was going to give them the surprise of their lives. In that moment, I decided they were going to meet an Eleanor they had never seen before. An Eleanor who was no longer going to be the complacent and generous grandmother she had always been. That night, as I listened to Rebecca's baby crying and the twins' constant complaints that my house was too small and boring, I couldn't help but remember what my life was like before this invasion. Just a week ago, my routine was perfect, orderly, exactly as I had dreamed it would be during all those years of hard work. I would get up at 6 a.m., brew my coffee in the coffee maker I bought for myself when I turned 60, and sit in my favorite armchair to read the newspaper as the sun streamed through my living room windows. My house was my sanctuary. Every piece of furniture had its place. Every decoration told a story of my years of effort. The cream-coloured sofa I bought with my first Christmas bonus at the company, the green curtains I sewed myself during a rainy weekend, the solid wood coffee table I found at a garage sale and patiently restored for months. Everything had meaning, everything had a purpose, everything reflected 30 years of honest work as a secretary at Miller and Associates. I remembered my quiet mornings, watering the plants in my backyard, my red roses that bloomed every spring, my tomatoes that grew proudly next to the kitchen window, the aromatic herbs I used for cooking. I had a perfect routine. After breakfast, I would check my personal finances on the computer I bought last year, balance my checkbook, and pay my bills online. Everything was organized, everything was under control. My monthly expenses didn't exceed $800, including the mortgage that I would finish paying off in 2 more years. I dedicated my weekends to myself. I would go to the market early on Saturdays when the vegetables were freshest and the prices were lowest. I knew all the vendors by name, and they would save me the best tomatoes, the best lettuce. Mrs. Carmen, who sold flowers, always set aside a small bouquet of white carnations that I would buy to decorate my dining room table. It was my small weekly luxury, $5, that gave me immense joy. My social life was simple but satisfying. On Tuesday afternoons, I would have tea with my neighbor Naomi, a 70-year-old woman who had become my best friend since I retired. We would talk about everything, the novels we were reading, the TV shows, our children and grandchildren. Naomi always told me I was lucky to have such a responsible son as Gabe. If she could see what I was seeing now, she would realize how wrong she was. On Thursday evenings, I attended yoga classes at the community center. It had been hard at first, but now I enjoyed that hour of peace and relaxation. The instructor, a young woman in her 30s named Aurora, always reminded us of the importance of keeping our minds clear and our bodies strong. Age is just a number, she would say. The important thing is how we feel inside. And I felt good, strong, independent, capable of taking care of myself until I was 90 if necessary. My retirement had been carefully planned for years. I had my savings in the bank, exactly $23,400 that I had saved, penny by penny, for decades. A savings account that I checked religiously every month, watching it grow little by little with interest. Money that I had set aside for medical emergencies, for small home improvements, for maybe one day being able to travel and visit my sister who lives in Spain. I also had my small collection of jewelry that I had inherited from my mother, a gold ring with a green stone that had belonged to my grandmother, a pair of pearl earrings that my late husband gave me for our 10th anniversary, and a silver chain I had bought with my first paycheck as a secretary. Simple pieces, but of incalculable sentimental value, stored in a small safe that I had hidden in my closet. My nightly routine was also sacred. After dinner, always something light and healthy that I prepared for just one person, I would take a relaxing bath with aromatic salts. Then I would put on my favorite cotton robe, the pink one with little flowers that my cousin Julia had given me for my last birthday, and I would sit down to watch my favorite TV shows. The 8 o'clock news, then a soap opera, and finally I would go to bed at 10 p.m. My bed, my personal refuge, with sheets that were always clean, which I changed religiously every Sunday, soft pillows that I had carefully chosen from the department store, and my favorite quilt, hand-knitted by my mother years ago. It was my intimate space where I would read a few pages of a romance novel before sleeping, where I would plan my next day's activities, where I would dream of small projects to improve my garden or redecorate a room. All of that had changed in less than 24 hours. Now my house looked like a battlefield. Toys were scattered all over the living room, dirty diapers were in my trash can, dirty dishes were piling up in my sink. The baby cried at all hours. The twins yelled and ran through my hallways as if it were a public park, and Rebecca acted as if she were the owner of my home. But what hurt me the most were not the practical inconveniences. It was the total lack of respect for the life I had built with so much effort. Gabe and Rebecca had destroyed my peace as if it were worth nothing, as if my 65 years of experience and work didn't even deserve an honest conversation about what they really needed. On the third day of forced cohabitation, while I was pretending to be asleep in my own room, which I was sharing with two girls who wouldn't stop moving and talking, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was 2 a.m. when Gabe and Rebecca started whispering in the next room, believing no one could hear them. But the walls of my house aren't that thick, and when you've lived alone for 5 years, you develop a very keen ear for any unusual noise. "Did you check how much is in the bank account?" Rebecca asked my son with that calculating voice that I now recognized perfectly. According to what I saw in the papers on her desk, she must have at least $23,000 saved, plus what this house is worth. We're talking about a fortune for an old woman who lives alone. The way she said old woman cut through me like a knife. It wasn't affection. It wasn't family respect. It was pure contempt. My son, the same one I held in my arms when he was a baby, the one who cried in my lap when he hurt his knee learning to ride a bike, responded in a way I never thought possible. "The main account has $23,400, but I also found some papers for a life insurance policy that's worth $50,000. If we can convince her to make us beneficiaries, we're set." His voice had a coldness that was completely unfamiliar to me, as if he were talking about a stranger and not his own mother. I was paralyzed in my bed, feeling like the world was collapsing around me. The twins were sleeping soundly beside me, oblivious to the conversation that was destroying everything I thought I knew about my family. Rebecca laughed that low, malicious laugh I had heard other times but had never interpreted correctly. "Your mother is exactly as you said, sentimental, trusting, easy to manipulate. When I told her the girls needed new clothes for school, she immediately offered to give us $500. It's like taking candy from a baby." Gabe continued, "The plan is working perfectly." And I felt as if thousands of needles were being stuck into my heart. First, we get established here as if it's temporary. Then we start taking control of her finances little by little. I already got her to give me access to her email account to help with online payments. In another week, I'll be able to get into her bank account without her noticing. Rebecca applauded softly as if my son had just told her the funniest joke in the world. And then comes the second phase, convincing her to sign some papers to protect her assets for when she's older. My cousin Ezekiel, the one who works as a notary, already explained exactly what documents we need for her to transfer the house's ownership to your name. All legal, all clean, and she'll think she's doing it for love of her family. The words hit me one after another like punches. I realized that every gesture of affection, every smile, every "I love you, Mum" from the last few months had been part of a perfectly calculated performance. I remembered when Gabe had started visiting me more often 3 months ago, always asking me about my plans for the future, about whether I had thought about making a will, about whether I felt safe living alone. At the time, I was filled with joy to see my son so interested in my well-being. Now I understood that he was a predator, evaluating his prey. "What if she figures something out before it's time?" Rebecca asked, and I could hear the bed moving, probably her snuggling up to my son, as if they were two accomplices planning the perfect crime. "She won't figure it out," Gabe responded with a certainty that made me sick. My mother has always been naive. When my father was cheating her out of household money, it took her years to notice, and even then, she never did anything about it. She's too good for her own good. That's when I remembered something I had blocked from my mind for years. My late husband, Gabe's father, had indeed been stealing money from me during the last years of our marriage, money I earned by working double shifts as a secretary. Money he spent on alcohol and gambling, which I only discovered after he died. But I never thought Gabe knew about it, much less that he saw it as an example to follow. Besides, my son continued with that cold voice that I no longer recognized as his own, if for some reason she gets difficult, we can always use the grandkids. She would do anything for the twins and the baby. They're her weak point. It was true. I adored those children. I saw them as my second chance to be the perfect grandmother, since maybe I hadn't been the perfect mother. But now I realized that even that pure love was being used as a weapon against me. Rebecca laughed again, and this time her laughter sounded like nails dragging against a blackboard. I already talked to my sister Julia about this. She did the same thing with her mother-in-law last year. She convinced her to sell her house and move to a retirement home, supposedly for her own safety. Now Julia lives in that house with her family, and the old woman pays for her own stay at the home with the money from the sale. Great, right? My heart stopped completely. Julia, Rebecca's sister, who had always seemed so sweet and helpful when she came to family gatherings, who always asked about my health with a concern that I now recognized as completely false. She had done this before. It wasn't the first time. I wasn't their first victim. It was part of a pattern, a method perfected to steal the lives of older people in their own family. The only problem, Gabe murmured, is that my mother is stronger than we thought. Yesterday I saw her looking through some papers on her desk, and when I went over to ask what she was doing, she put them away very quickly. I hope she's not starting to suspect something. Rebecca responded with a confidence that gave me chills. Don't worry. Tomorrow I'm going to start acting more affectionate with her. Maybe cook her favorite meal. Ask her about her memories of her youth. Old people soften up when they feel someone is really listening to them. Hearing that conversation was like watching my own death in slow motion. Not only were they planning to steal everything I had worked for my entire life, but they were doing it with a coldness and precision that showed me I had never been a mother to Gabe. I had been a source of income, a long-term investment that was finally paying off. And Rebecca was not just a manipulative daughter-in-law, she was a professional criminal who had turned elder abuse into her way of life. When they finally fell silent and I heard their regular breathing, indicating they had fallen asleep, I stayed awake until dawn, feeling every fibre of my being transform. The naive and trusting Eleanor had died that night in that bed, listening to the greatest betrayal of her life. In her place, a woman was born who was going to fight for everything that was hers, no matter the emotional cost. The following days were the most difficult of my life. Waking up every morning knowing the truth but having to pretend I knew nothing was like living in a play where I was the only one who knew the tragic ending. I watched Gabe eat breakfast in my kitchen using my coffee maker, eating the bread I had bought, and I had to smile at him as if he were the loving son I had always believed he was. Meanwhile, my mind wouldn't stop racing, analysing every moment of the last few months, every conversation, every gesture that now took on a completely different meaning. I remembered when Gabe had come to visit me 4 months ago, right after my 65th birthday. That day, he had brought me yellow flowers, my favourites, and we had spent the whole afternoon talking in the garden. He had asked me about my plans for the future, about whether I had thought about renovating the house, about whether I felt lonely living alone. At the time, I had been filled with joy to see my son so interested in my well-being. Now I realised that it had been the first phase of his investigation. "Mum, have you thought about investing your savings in something more profitable?" he had asked that afternoon while we were drinking lemonade in the shade of the lemon tree I had planted 10 years ago. With inflation, money in the bank loses value every year. I know some options that could give you better returns. I had immediately rejected the idea, telling him I preferred the security of my traditional savings account. He had smiled and told me I was right, that it was better to be conservative. But now I remembered the sparkle in his eyes when I mentioned the exact amount I had saved. I also remembered the time Rebecca had come to visit me alone 2 months ago, supposedly to ask for advice on how to raise the twins. We had been sitting in the living room, and she had admired every piece of furniture, every decoration, asking me the story behind each item. "Eleanor, you have exquisite taste for decorating. This house must be worth a fortune on the current market," she had told me, stroking the back of my sofa. "Have you ever thought about getting it appraised, just for insurance purposes?" That day, Rebecca had also insisted on helping me organize my important documents. "Mother-in-law at your age, it's important to have everything in order. Where do you keep your bank papers, the property deeds, the insurance policies?" I, the fool I was, had shown her exactly where I kept everything. I had even explained my organizational system, how I classified my bills, my account statements, my legal documents. Now I understood that she wasn't being helpful. She was facilitating my own robbery. But what hurt me the most was remembering all the times I had defended Gabe when other people warned me about him. My neighbor Naomi had commented to me on several occasions that she thought it was strange that my son only visited me when he needed something. "Eleanor," she had told me a month ago during our Tuesday tea, "I don't want to get involved in your family, but don't you think it's strange that Gabe never invites you to his house? He always comes here, he always needs favors, but he never includes you in his real life." I had immediately jumped to my son's defense. "Naomi, you don't understand. Gabe is a busy man. He has responsibilities. Besides, he prefers to come here because he knows I like to have visitors in my own home." Now I realized that Naomi had seen what I refused to accept, that Gabe saw me as a source of resources, not as a mother. I also remembered a conversation I had with Aurora, my yoga instructor, 3 weeks ago. During the class, we had been talking about the importance of setting healthy boundaries with family. "Eleanor," she had told me after the session, "I've noticed you seem more stressed lately. Is everything okay at home?" I had told her about Gabe's more frequent visits and about how I sometimes felt pressured to help him financially more than my budget allowed. Aurora had looked at me with that wisdom some young people have and had said something that at the time I didn't want to hear. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the most because they know exactly where our vulnerable points are. It's important for you to remember that your generosity shouldn't become your weakness. I had quickly changed the subject, feeling uncomfortable with that conversation. Now I realized that Aurora had been trying to warn me. While I pretended to be normal during the day, my mind was filled with terrifying questions. How long had Gabe been planning this? Was there anything real in the love he showed me, or had it all been an act from the beginning? Did the twins know anything about their parents' plans? Would the baby grow up thinking this was normal, that it was okay to take advantage of grandparents? The question that tormented me the most was about my own judgment. How had I been so blind? How could a woman who had worked for 30 years in an office, who had managed budgets, who had dealt with all kinds of people, be so naive with her own family? I felt like a complete idiot, as if all my years of work and life experience had been for nothing when I really needed them. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would get up quietly and check my documents again and again. I would count my money, verify my bank accounts online, making sure everything was still under my control. But I also noticed small things that had changed. Some papers weren't exactly where I had left them. My computer had a browse history I didn't remember making. My address book had been moved. The fear began to take hold of me in ways I had never experienced. It wasn't just fear for my money or my house. It was existential fear. Fear of having lived my whole life as a fool. Fear that my own son was a complete stranger to me. Fear that everything I thought I knew about family love was a lie. How could I trust my own judgment after having been so wrong about the most important people in my life? I also started to have physical fear. If Gabe and Rebecca were capable of planning to rob me in such a calculated way, how far would they be willing to go to get what they wanted? What would happen if they discovered that I knew the truth? Would they be willing to hurt me physically to get my money? The idea that my own son could harm me was so terrifying that it kept me completely awake. But along with the fear, something stronger was also growing inside me. A cold and determined rage I had never felt before. Every time I saw Rebecca smiling falsely at me while she washed dishes in my kitchen, every time I heard Gabe talk to me with that condescending voice that I now recognized as pure manipulation, that rage became more intense. One night, while I was awake thinking about all this, I remembered something my mother had told me years ago, when I was a young woman of 20 dealing with my first difficult job. Eleanor, in this life there are moments when you have to decide if you are going to be a victim or a warrior. No one can make that decision for you, but once you make it, you have to be prepared for the consequences. In that moment, lying in my own bed while I listened to the granddaughters who were being used as emotional weapons against me, I decided that I had been a victim for long enough. The frightened and confused Eleanor, who had spent days questioning her own sanity, began to transform into something more dangerous. An older woman with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The transformation was not immediate, but it was complete. On the 5th day of forced cohabitation, while Rebecca was preparing breakfast in my kitchen, acting like the perfect daughter-in-law, and Gabe was playing with the twins in the living room, pretending to be the dedicated father, I began my own silent investigation. Yes, they could act. I could too. But unlike them, I had 65 years of experience observing people and 30 years of working in an office where I had learned that the smallest details always reveal the biggest truths. My first step was to thoroughly review all my financial information. I waited until Gabe supposedly went to look for a job and Rebecca took the twins to the park with the baby. Then I locked my bedroom door and took out all my bank documents from the last 6 months. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. My checking account showed 3 cash withdrawals that I didn't remember making. One for $200 2 months ago, another for $3 last month, and one for $5 2 weeks ago. The withdrawals had been made at ATMs located near Gabe's house, at times when I was definitely at home. Someone had been using a debit card with my name on it. They had cloned mine. I checked my wallet and found my card in its usual place, but that meant nothing. With today's technology, cloning a card was easier than a woman my age could imagine. I also discovered something more disturbing. My savings account, which should have had exactly $23,400, now showed $3,100. $300 had disappeared without me having authorized any transaction. When I called the bank to ask, they told me the withdrawal had been made online with valid authorization using my password and personal information. But I had never made that transaction. I immediately changed all my bank passwords and requested new debit cards. I told the bank representative there were security reasons for these changes, without mentioning that I suspected my own family. I also asked them to mail me all the account statements from the last 6 months, something I normally checked online, but now I needed to have them on paper for evidence. My second step was to contact Naomi. My neighbor and friend had shown herself to have a very accurate intuition about Gabe, and now I desperately needed to talk to someone I could completely trust. That afternoon, when the family of invaders went out for a walk in the neighborhood, I walked to Naomi's house with my heart beating so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. "Eleanor, you look terrible," Naomi said as soon as she opened the door. "What is really going on with your son and his family?" When I told her the whole story, from the nightly conversation I had overheard to the unauthorized withdrawals from my account, Naomi turned pale as a ghost. "My God, Eleanor, this is not just family irresponsibility, this is financial fraud. It's a serious crime." Naomi helped me think clearly. "You need to document everything," she said, pouring me a cup of chamomile tea to calm my nerves. "Every suspicious conversation, every strange movement of money, every lie they tell you, and you need to do it without them realizing you suspect anything." She also gave me a piece of advice that completely changed my perspective. "Eleanor, you were a secretary for 30 years. You know how to investigate, how to organize information, how to document irregularities. Use those skills now. With Naomi's help, I developed a systematic investigation plan. First, I discreetly installed a small voice recorder that Naomi lent me in my room, hidden behind some books on my nightstand. If Gabe and Rebecca talked about their plans again during the night, I would have a recorded evidence of their criminal intentions. I also started meticulously jotting everything down in a small notebook that I hid inside an old pillowcase in my closet. Every time Gabe asked questions about my finances, every time Rebecca showed too much interest in my documents, every time either of them left the house with vague excuses, I wrote it down with the exact date and time. My third step was to discreetly contact the bank to request a meeting with a financial advisor. I explained that I had concerns about the security of my accounts and that I wanted to review all the options available to protect my savings. The advisor, a young man named Sebastian, scheduled an appointment for the following Friday at 10 a.m. During that meeting, I told him the whole truth. Sebastian listened to me with a seriousness that reassured me. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, "what you are describing is a very common pattern of financial abuse against elderly people. Unfortunately, in 80% of the cases, the perpetrators are direct family members of the victim." He explained that the bank had specific protocols for these situations and that they could place special alerts on all my accounts. "We're going to do several things," Sebastian said, taking notes on his computer. "First, we're going to create a new savings account at a different branch where we will transfer the majority of your money. Second, we're going to place automatic alerts for any transaction greater than 50 on your existing accounts. Third, we're going to change all your online access information and create completely new security questions." He also gave me the phone number for the bank's financial crimes unit, in case I needed to formally report fraudulent activity. My fourth step was to physically document everything that was happening in my house. Using my cell phone, which I had learned to use better last year, I started taking discrete photos of any evidence that could be useful. I photographed Gabe going through my papers when he thought I wasn't looking. I recorded short videos of Rebecca rummaging through my drawers while she was supposedly helping to clean. I documented every time I found my documents out of place. I also started paying more attention to the phone conversations they had when they thought I wasn't listening. Rebecca frequently spoke to someone named Ezekiel, always in a low voice, always about the plan and the papers. Once I heard her say, "The old woman is more cooperative than we expected, but we have to hurry before she figures something out." The hardest part of this whole investigation was maintaining the act during the day. I had to smile at Gabe when he asked to borrow $20 for gas. I had to thank Rebecca when she helped me organize my documents. I had to play with the twins and act like the loving grandmother, knowing they were being used as emotional tools to manipulate me. But every night, when I reviewed my notes and listened to the recordings I had managed to capture, my determination grew stronger. One night, I recorded a particularly revealing conversation. Gabe was telling Rebecca, "Tomorrow, I'm going to ask her if she can lend me $200 for a medical emergency for one of the twins. If she says yes, we'll know she still doesn't suspect anything. If she refuses or asks questions, it means she's starting to catch on, and we'll have to speed up the process." That recording gave me an idea. The next day, when Gabe asked me for exactly $200, mentioning a supposed ear infection for one of the twins, I said yes immediately. But before I gave him the money, I asked him the name of the doctor who had diagnosed the child so I could send her a get well card. Gabe stammered and invented a fake name, and I smiled sweetly while mentally taking note of every detail of his lie. After 2 weeks of silent investigation, I had enough evidence to fill a complete file. Audio recordings of their nightly conversations planning to rob me, photographs of them going through my private documents, bank records of unauthorized transactions, detailed notes of every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to access my financial information. But most importantly, I had a plan. I wasn't going to be the silent victim they expected. I was going to use every year of experience, every skill I had developed in my working life, every ounce of intelligence they had underestimated in me to give them the surprise of their lives. The moment of truth arrived exactly 3 weeks after Gabe and his family had moved into my house. I had planned everything carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to confront them with all the evidence I had collected. That moment came on a Thursday afternoon when I intercepted a phone call that revealed the final phase of their diabolical plan. Rebecca was talking to someone in the kitchen while preparing dinner, believing I was asleep in my room, but I was listening from the hallway, recording every word with my small recorder. "Yes, Ezekiel, we have everything ready," she was saying in that soft voice that I now recognized as pure evil. "Tomorrow morning, Gabe is going to take the old woman to the notary so she can sign the property transfer papers. We told her it's just to protect the house in case of a medical emergency." The conversation continued, and what I heard next completely chilled my blood. "Once she signs the transfer, we have 3 days to get her out of here before she realizes what she really signed. My contact at the retirement home, Twilight Angels, already has everything prepared. 1,100 a month paid from her own savings account, and we get the house free and clear." A retirement home. They were going to put me in a retirement home after stealing my house. The woman who had given birth to Gabe, who had raised him alone after his father died, who had worked for 30 years to give him a decent life, was going to end her days in an institution paid for with her own money while they enjoyed her property. The betrayal was so complete, so absolutely inhumane, that for a moment I thought I was going to pass out. But instead of collapsing, something inside me ignited like a giant flame. It was time to act. That same night, after everyone was asleep, I called Naomi and told her to set the second phase of our plan in motion. I also contacted Sebastian from the bank, who had promised to help me if the situation escalated to a direct attempt at fraud. The next morning, when Gabe woke me up with that fake smile that I now hated more than anything in the world, I was completely prepared. "Mom, I have a very important appointment for you today," he said, acting like the concerned son. "It's with a notary that was recommended to me. You're going to sign some papers to protect the house and your savings in case you have a medical emergency in the future." I feigned the confusion of a vulnerable old woman. "Papers? What kind of papers, son?" Gabe explained with that condescending patience he had perfected over weeks that they were very important legal documents for my own good. Rebecca appeared in the kitchen at that moment, smiling as if she were the most loving daughter-in-law in the world. "Mother-in-law, Gabe has gone to a lot of trouble to protect your interests. You should be grateful to have such a responsible son." I told them yes, I would be ready in an hour. But what they didn't know was that during that hour, I had executed my own plan with the precision of a military operation. First, I called the notary's office we were supposedly going to and confirmed that they did indeed have an appointment in Gabe's name for an elderly lady to sign property transfer documents. The secretary confirmed it was a legitimate appointment, but that the documents would completely transfer my property to my son's name. Second, I activated the digital recorder I had hidden in my purse, the same one I had been using for weeks to document their criminal conversations. Third, I sent a text message to Naomi with a single word: now. That was the signal for her to set the most important part of my revenge plan in motion. When we arrived at the notary's office, I was acting like the perfect grandmother, a little confused, completely trusting in her son, ready to sign anything he told me was for my own good. The notary, a middle-aged man who had clearly done this many times before, began to explain the documents to me in legal language that was designed to confuse elderly people. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said to me, "these documents simply transfer the ownership of your house to your son's name, with you retaining the right to live there as long as you are physically and mentally capable." It was a lie. I had studied those documents for weeks with Sebastian's help and knew exactly what they meant. A complete transfer of ownership without any guaranteed rights for me. In that moment, I decided to reveal my true nature. "Excuse me," I said to the notary in a voice that was suddenly clear and firm, which surprised both Gabe and Rebecca. "Could you explain to me exactly what Clause 7 of this document means? The part that says the new owner has the right to dispose of the property as they see fit, including sale or transfer to third parties." The silence in the office was absolute. Gabe looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. Rebecca turned pale as a sheet. The notary coughed uncomfortably and admitted that yes, that clause would effectively give Gabe complete right to sell my house without my consent. "I see," I said, keeping my voice calm, but letting my gaze harden to steel. "And I suppose that clause 12, where I waive any legal right to the proceeds of a future sale, is also for my protection, right?" Gabe tried to interrupt. "Mum, you don't understand how these legal things work." But I silenced him with a look that contained 65 years of life experience and 3 weeks of accumulated rage. "Son," I said, and I put so much contempt into that word that he visibly flinched. "I understand perfectly how these things work. The question is, do you understand the legal consequences of fraud against the elderly?" Rebecca tried to regain control of the situation. "Mother-in-law, I think you're confused. No one is trying to scam you. We just want to protect you." Her voice had lost all its fake sweetness and now sounded desperate. I took out my phone and played the recording of their conversation from the day before, where she talked about the retirement home and about getting me out of my own house in 3 days. Her face transformed completely when she heard her own voice planning my future in an institution. Gabe stood up so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. "You've been spying on us," he yelled. And for the first time in weeks, I could see his true personality. He wasn't a desperate son. He was a furious criminal because his plan had been discovered. "No," I responded with a calm that surprised even myself. "I have been documenting a crime in progress, financial fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and now attempted real estate fraud." I stood up from my chair and looked at both of them with an authority I hadn't felt in years. "What you didn't understand is that I worked in an office for 30 years. I know how to document irregularities, how to collect evidence, and how to report criminal activities to the appropriate authorities." The notary, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the situation had taken, announced that the session was over and that he was not going to process any documents without an independent investigation of the intentions of all the parties involved. Gabe and Rebecca looked at each other in absolute panic, realizing that their perfect plan had completely unraveled. Rebecca made one last desperate attempt. "Eleanor, we're family. We can solve this at home, in private. There's no need to involve strangers in our family matters." But I had already made my final decision. "Family," I repeated, savoring the irony of that word. "A family doesn't plan to put their mother in a retirement home after stealing all her property. A family doesn't clone debit cards to steal money from their loved ones' bank accounts. A family doesn't use children as emotional weapons to manipulate their grandparents." I told them they had exactly 24 hours to get out of my house, and that if they didn't do it voluntarily, the police would escort them. I also informed them that I had already changed all my bank passwords, that I had transferred my savings to new accounts to which they had no access, and that I had contacted a lawyer specializing in financial crimes against the elderly. The transformation on their faces was complete. The mask of a concerned son and loving daughter-in-law disappeared completely, revealing 2 criminals who had been caught in the act. And I, the foolish old woman they thought they could easily manipulate, was enjoying every second of their desperation. I thought the worst was over after confronting Gabe and Rebecca at the notary's office, but I was completely wrong. The true dimension of their betrayal was revealed 2 days later, when an unknown woman knocked on my door at 8 a.m. She was a lady approximately my age, maybe a little younger, with grey hair and an expression of anguish that I immediately recognized because I had worn that same look for the past few weeks. "Are you Eleanor?" she asked me in a trembling voice. "I'm Linda, Rebecca's mother. I need to talk to you urgently about what our children have been doing to you." My blood froze. Linda, the mother of Rebecca. But this Linda was a destroyed woman who had come to tell me a truth that was worse than I had imagined. I invited her in and made her coffee, noticing how her hands trembled when she held the cup. "Eleanor," she began, "what I'm going to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, but you have the right to know the complete truth." She told me that Rebecca and Gabe had been executing this same plan for the past 3 years, not just with me, but with at least 5 different families. "They started with Rebecca's grandmother 3 years ago," Linda explained to me with tears in her eyes. "They convinced her to sell her house and move to a retirement home for her own safety. They kept all the money from the sale, more than $60,000. When the poor woman realized what had happened, it was already too late. She died in that retirement home 8 months later, completely alone and without a penny." But that was just the beginning. Linda told me about Gabe's aunt, a 70-year-old woman who had worked her whole life as a teacher. "They stole $50,000 from her retirement account," she continued. "First they moved in with her under the pretext of taking care of her after a minor surgery. Then they made her sign documents that gave Gabe power of attorney over her finances. When she protested, they convinced her she had senile dementia and needed constant supervision." The story got more horrible with every detail. She also told me about an elderly widower, a family friend, who had lent the young couple $25,000 for their family business that never existed. When he started asking about the money, Linda explained, they threatened to accuse him of sexual harassment toward Rebecca if he kept bothering them. The poor man was so afraid of the scandal that he never mentioned his money again. But what shocked me the most was discovering that Linda herself had been a victim of her own daughter. "Rebecca convinced me to mortgage my house to lend them $30,000 2 years ago," she told me, wiping her tears with a crumpled handkerchief. "She told me it was for the twins' education, to give them a better future. I mortgaged the house that my late husband and I had paid for over 20 years. Now I'm about to lose it because I can't make the payments, and they refuse to give me back a single penny." I realized that what I had experienced was not an isolated case of irresponsible children taking advantage of their mother. It was a systematic criminal pattern, a way of life that they had perfected over years. Gabe and Rebecca were professional predators who specialized in exploiting the elderly, using family ties as weapons to destroy entire lives. Linda also revealed something that completely changed my perspective on the twins. "Eleanor," she said, lowering her voice as if it were a terrible secret, "the girls aren't just innocent victims in this. Rebecca has been training them to act especially sweet to grandparents and elderly people. She teaches them what to say to make people feel guilty if they don't give them money or gifts." That explained why the twins always said things to me like, "Grandma Eleanor, Mum says you don't have money to buy us toys because you're poor." Or, "Dad says you have to help us because we're your family, and family always helps each other." They weren't innocent comments from children, they were calculated manipulations taught by their own parents. But the most shocking revelation came when Linda showed me photographs on her phone. "This is my daughter's real business," she said, showing me images of a luxurious house in an exclusive neighborhood. "They bought this property last year with the money they stole from all their victims. It's worth more than $200,000. Meanwhile, they told you they couldn't pay $800 in rent." The photographs showed a 2-story house with a perfectly manicured lawn, 2 new cars in the driveway, and a swimming pool in the backyard. In one of the images, I could see Rebecca sunbathing by the pool, smiling as if she didn't have a care in the world. In another, Gabe was grilling meat on a barbecue that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. "So why did they come to my house saying they had no money?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. Linda sighed deeply. Because you were their next target. They had been studying your financial situation for months. They knew exactly how much money you had saved, what your house was worth, how easy it would be to manipulate you emotionally using the children. She explained that they had developed an almost scientific system for choosing their victims. They looked for elderly people who lived alone, who had substantial savings, but no extended family who could interfere, who were emotionally vulnerable due to loneliness or the desire to help family. You fit all the criteria perfectly, Linda told me. A hard-working woman with good savings, without other children who could ask questions, and with a heart big enough to sacrifice your own comfort for your grandchildren. But there was more. Linda told me that Rebecca had an accomplice I had never seen. Her brother, Ezekiel, who worked at an insurance company and had access to personal financial information of potential clients. He would provide them with lists of elderly people with substantial life insurance policies or large savings accounts, she explained. It was like having a catalogue of potential victims. I also learned that they had been planning something even more sinister with me. Once they had managed to transfer your house into Gabe's name, Linda continued, the next step was to convince you to change the beneficiary of your life insurance. Rebecca had contacts at the retirement home where they planned to intern you, people who could accelerate the natural process if necessary. The implication of her words terrified me. They not only wanted to steal everything I had while I was alive, but they were willing to accelerate my death to collect my life insurance. Sitting in my living room, listening to this destroyed woman tell me about the true criminal nature of my son and daughter-in-law, I realized that I had completely underestimated the situation. I wasn't dealing with greedy relatives or irresponsible children. I was dealing with a criminal organization that specialized in the financial murder of the elderly and that had apparently perfected their methods into a life-destroying machine. Why are you telling me all this? I asked Linda. Her response broke my heart and filled me with a renewed determination at the same time. Because I'm tired of being a silent accomplice to my own daughter's crimes. Because I've seen too many lives destroyed and I can't keep living with that guilt. And because you were smart enough to figure out what was happening before it was too late. I realized that my confrontation with Gabe and Rebecca had been only the first act of a much larger play. Now I had information about multiple victims, evidence of a systematic criminal pattern, and the opportunity to do something that was much bigger than simply protecting my own savings. I had the chance to stop a criminal organization and get justice, not just for myself, but for all the elderly people who had been destroyed by these heartless predators. With all the information that Linda had provided me, it was no longer just about protecting my own interests. I had in my hands evidence of a criminal operation that had destroyed multiple lives for years. That same afternoon, after Linda left, promising to stay in contact to testify when necessary, I called Sebastian from the bank and told him everything I had discovered. His reaction was immediate and professional. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said with a seriousness that reassured me, "what you are describing constitutes multiple federal offences: bank fraud, financial elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and possibly even homicide if they were truly planning to accelerate your death to collect life insurance." He explained that the bank had specific protocols for reporting this type of criminal activity and that my case would be immediately transferred to the Financial Investigations Department. But Sebastian warned me that we would need more solid evidence for the authorities to act effectively. "The recordings you have are excellent, but we need to document the complete pattern of their criminal activities. Would you be willing to collaborate with an undercover investigation to get more evidence?" Without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. After being underestimated as a naive old woman for weeks, I was ready to show what I was really capable of. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Sebastian contacted a detective specializing in financial crimes named Avner, who had decades of experience investigating scams against the elderly. The detective explained that they were going to use my situation as an undercover operation to document all of Gabe and Rebecca's criminal activities, not only with me, but with their other victims as well. Mrs. Eleanor, Detective Avner told me during our first secret meeting at the public library, you are going to pretend that you have decided to cooperate completely with their plans. We are going to install professional recording equipment in your house. We're going to monitor all of their phone communications, and we're going to document every step of their criminal operation. The idea was to let them think they had won while we collected irrefutable evidence of all their crimes. That night, when Gabe and Rebecca returned to my house after having been apartment hunting all day, a lie that I now knew was to give me time to reconsider my position, I greeted them with the performance of my life. "Kids," I said to them in a trembling voice with fake tears in my eyes, "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday at the notary's office. I think I reacted badly out of fear and confusion." The transformation on their faces was immediate. Gabe approached me with that manipulative smile I now recognized perfectly. "Mum, I knew you'd understand. We just want to protect you and make sure you have the best care possible when you're older." Rebecca hugged me with that false warmth that made me nauseous, but that I now had to tolerate for the sake of the investigation. I told them I had reflected and that I realized they were right, that I needed help managing my financial affairs, and that I trusted they would know what was best for me. "Tomorrow we can go back to the notaries," I told them, "and this time I will sign all the papers you think are appropriate." Their eyes shone with a greed so obvious that I wondered how I could have been so blind before. What they didn't know was that every word of that conversation was being recorded with professional equipment that Detective Avner had discreetly installed in my house that very afternoon. They had also installed small hidden cameras that would visually document any evidence of manipulation or coercion. For the next 3 days, Gabe and Rebecca behaved exactly like the professional criminals they were. Believing they had regained total control of the situation, they completely relaxed and began to show their true nature. Rebecca openly called her brother Ezekiel to coordinate the next target after they were done with me. Gabe contacted his accomplices at the retirement home to speed up the admission process for the old woman. But the most incriminating moment came when Rebecca received a call from someone she called Doctor. During that conversation, which was fully recorded, they discussed medications that could accelerate the natural process in elderly people without leaving detectable traces in an autopsy. It was direct evidence of a conspiracy to commit homicide, exactly what Detective Avner needed to secure significant prison sentences. On the 4th day, when we went back to the notary's office to complete the property transfer, I knew it was the final moment of the operation. But this time, the notary was not the same man I had seen before. He was an undercover federal agent who had replaced the original notary as part of the investigation. When Gabe and Rebecca entered that office, believing they were finally going to get all my money and property, they walked directly into a perfectly coordinated trap. "Before you sign these documents," the fake notary said, "I need to verify that Mrs. Eleanor fully understands the implications of what she is signing." He then began to ask me very specific questions about my financial situation, my future plans, and my family relationships. Each question was designed for Gabe and Rebecca to reveal more details of their criminal plan. "Mrs. Eleanor," the agent asked, "are you signing these documents of your own free will, or has someone pressured or threatened you to do so?" Following the instructions I had received, I replied that I felt a little pressured, but that I trusted my children. Immediately, Rebecca intervened with that syrupy voice she had perfected. "Of course there's no pressure. Eleanor understands that this is for her own good." Then the agent asked about my future housing plans. "Where do you plan to live after you transfer ownership of your house?" Gabe answered for me. "We have everything arranged. My mother is going to move into a retirement residence where she will receive the best care, a place called Twilight Angels." It was exactly the confession we needed. The culminating moment came when the agent asked about the financing for my stay at the retirement home. Who is going to pay the costs of the residence? Rebecca, with a confidence that now made me sick, explained that I would pay my own expenses with the savings I had accumulated over the years, while they would take care of maintaining the house until it was necessary to sell it. At that exact moment, the office doors opened and 4 federal agents with vests that said FBI Financial Crimes entered. Detective Avner showed his identification and announced, "Gabe and Rebecca Matthews, you are under arrest for multiple counts of financial fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to commit homicide." The expression on their faces was the most satisfying image I had seen in my life. The arrogant confidence transformed into absolute terror in a matter of seconds. Rebecca tried to run to the door, but was immediately stopped by one of the agents. Gabe looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation that made me realize that he had never, not for a second, felt real love for me. As they were being handcuffed and read their rights, Detective Avner explained that they had enough evidence to prosecute not only Gabe and Rebecca, but also their accomplices. Rebecca's brother, who provided private financial information, the employees at the retirement home, who were willing to accelerate deaths for money, and the supposed doctor who supplied the lethal medications. "Mrs. Eleanor," the detective said to me as we watched my son and daughter-in-law being taken away in the back seat of a police car, "your courage and intelligence have not only saved your own savings and your life, but they have exposed a criminal network that would have continued to victimize elderly people for years. You should be very proud of what you have accomplished." In that moment, standing in front of the notary's office, watching as the criminals who had tried to destroy my life were brought to justice, I felt stronger and more powerful than I had felt in decades. 6 months after the arrest of Gabe and Rebecca, I am sitting in my backyard enjoying a cup of coffee with Linda, who has become one of my best friends. It's a perfect Saturday morning, with the sun filtering through the leaves of my lemon tree and my red roses blooming more beautifully than ever. The peace I feel now is completely different from the tranquility I had before this whole nightmare. It's a peace that was earned, a peace I fought to get, and I value it infinitely more because I know how fragile it can be. "Have you heard anything about the trial?" Linda asks me, stirring her coffee with that expression of curiosity mixed with pain that she always has when we talk about our children. Detective Avner had explained that the legal process would be long, but that the evidence was so overwhelming it was almost impossible for Gabe and Rebecca to avoid significant prison sentences. "Last week, my lawyer confirmed that they are going to accept a plea deal," I reply, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Gabe is going to get between 8 and 10 years in prison for financial fraud and conspiracy. Rebecca could get up to 15 years because the prosecutor was able to prove she was the leader of the entire criminal operation. It's justice, but it hurts in a way I never imagined it would hurt. Linda nods in understanding. She too is dealing with the pain of accepting that her own daughter is a criminal. "My lawyer says there's a chance I can recover at least some of the money Rebecca stole from me," she tells me. "The luxurious house they bought is going to be confiscated by the authorities and sold to compensate the victims." It's a relief to know that Linda might be able to save her own house from the mortgage she took out to give money to her daughter. We also talked about the other victims who were identified during the investigation. In total, Gabe and Rebecca had scammed 11 elderly people over the last 4 years, stealing more than $300,000 in cash, fraudulently transferred properties, and unauthorized sold assets. Some of the victims had died without ever knowing they had been scammed. Others, like Gabe's aunt, were still alive, but had lost everything and now depended on social assistance to survive. "What hurts me the most," I confess to Linda while I look at my perfectly manicured garden, "is not the money they tried to steal from me or even the fact that they planned to kill me to collect my life insurance. What hurts me the most is realizing that they probably never truly loved me, that all those years, all those moments that I treasured as precious memories of my son were nothing more than long-term investments for him. Linda takes my hand with that understanding that can only come from someone who has experienced the same betrayal. "Eleanor," she says to me in a soft but firm voice, "the love you felt was real. The sacrifices you made for Gabe were real. The fact that he didn't know how to value that love doesn't mean you weren't a good mother. It means that he chose to become a bad son." Her words give me a perspective I have needed for months. I have spent entire nights awake, wondering where I went wrong, what signs I ignored, how I could have raised someone capable of so much cruelty. But Linda is right. I did my part as a mother. Gabe's criminal decisions are his responsibility, not mine. "And the twins?" I ask her, because that's the part of this whole situation that worries me the most. The girls have been temporarily placed with Gabe's parents, who are as shocked as I am to discover the true nature of their son. "My ex-mother-in-law called me yesterday," I reply. "She says the girls are receiving psychological therapy to help them understand what happened. Apparently, they knew more about their parents' plans than anyone imagined." It's painful to know that those little girls were trained to be part of a criminal operation, but I also feel hope that they are young enough to learn a different way of living. Their paternal grandparents are honest, hard-working people who never suspected what Gabe had been doing. Maybe, with proper love and guidance, the twins can grow up to be completely different people from their parents. Detective Avner has come to visit me several times since the arrest, not only to update me on the case, but to thank me for my collaboration in the investigation. "Mrs. Eleanor," he told me the last time he was here, "your case has helped establish new protocols in banks to identify and prevent financial elder abuse. Your courage is going to protect many other people in the future." Those words mean more to me than any financial compensation. Knowing that my horrible experience has served to protect other elderly people from going through the same thing gives me a sense of purpose that I didn't expect to find after all of this. My daily routine has returned to being peaceful, but now it is different. I still wake up at 6 a.m. and brew my coffee in the same coffee maker, but now I drink it with a renewed awareness of how precious my independence is. I still water my garden plants, but now every rose that blooms reminds me that I am stronger than I ever imagined. On Tuesday afternoons, I still have tea, but now it's with Linda instead of with Naomi, who moved to live with her daughter in another state after all the commotion of the case. Linda and I talk about everything, our favorite books, our TV shows, our plans for the future, but we also talk honestly about the pain of having been betrayed by our own children. And those conversations help me heal in ways I never thought would be possible. On Thursday evenings, I have returned to my yoga classes with the instructor Aurora, who told me last week that she sees a notable difference in my posture and my confidence. "Eleanor," she said to me after class, "there's something different about you. You seem stronger, more centered, more aware of your own strength." She's right. This experience has taught me that I am capable of much more than I believed. Financially, I am better off than ever. Not only did I recover all the money that Gabe and Rebecca had stolen from my accounts, but the forced sale of their properties has provided me with additional compensation as a victim of their crimes. My lawyer explained that, ironically, I now have more savings than I had before this whole nightmare began. But most importantly, I have recovered something that I didn't know I had lost: my self-esteem. For years after retiring, I had seen myself as a vulnerable old woman who needed the protection and guidance of younger generations. Now I know that I am a 65-year-old woman with decades of experience, with skills that I underestimated, and with an intelligence that can compete with any criminal who tries to take advantage of me. "Have you thought about dating anyone?" Linda asks me with that mischievous smile that has made me laugh so many times during these months of friendship. It's a question that would have terrified me a year ago, but which I now consider with genuine curiosity. "Maybe," I reply honestly. But this time, if I meet someone, I'm going to trust my instincts from the very beginning. I'm not going to ignore the warning signs just to be polite or understanding. As the sun sets over my garden and Linda gets ready to go home, I reflect on the path I have travelled during these months. I have lost a son, but I have gained a version of myself that is stronger, wiser, and more authentic than I had been in years. Today I am alone, I say to Linda as I walk her to the door, but for the first time in years, I am completely at peace with myself. And it's true. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I have a house that is truly mine, savings that I have protected with my own intelligence, and friendships based on mutual respect instead of family obligation. For the first time in my life.